have all sorts more things to say about it too, about just not only the algorithm behind it, but because we're outsiders and we're not beholden to the old ways. It's not like we're just taking the traditional way and tweaking it. We're smashing it with that hammer and doing even the interface. We're starting from scratch and doing things that are so sensible.
Oh yes, this is the Hardcore Marketing Show. I'm Casey Cheshire, your host for this epic journey. Today's show is sponsored by Ringmaster, on a mission to launch B2B podcasts that create relationships, generate revenue, and drive growth. Ringmasterlive.com. Bam. All right, class is in session. Welcome back, everyone. I'm excited. Oh, you didn't like that joke. It is an early morning, and I'm excited to introduce our guest today. He is back for another round, another session, another semester. I can't wait to introduce you all to my guest today. If you're curious about his backstory, go check out episode number 93, many moons ago. Well, who is he, Casey? Who is he? Let's get to it. Marketing professor and thought leader, quant nerd, author, keynote speaker, and pretty much everyone I talk to about him says he is just the coolest, nicest, kindest guy ever. He's been quoted and featured in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, The Economist, the Washington Post. You name it, people are talking about him. Named one of the 25 marketing tech trailblazers by Advertising Age, co-founder of Theta and Incompass Labs, professor of marketing at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. Dr. Peter Fader, welcome back.
I'm tired just hearing all that. But I'm also proud and delighted. So no, great to chat with you, Casey.
Well, you are busy. And the thing that I admire about you the most is that you are both studying and researching and thinking about concepts, but then you are applying them. My favorite professors were the ones that were either applying them or had applied them for years. And I paid attention in those classes. For those classes only was I a great student. And I'm excited to crack this thing open. So let me pass you your teaching wand here. It's heavy, but okay. Here we go.
Wow.
You got it?
All right. Thor for the day.
There we go. Take Thor's hammer, smash for me some kind of marketing myth, bogus strategy, misconception. Set the record straight once and for all.
Well, let's go back to episode 93, because I don't remember the exact words that I used, but it was something along the lines of customers really are different from each other, and we can measure it and we can leverage it, and we don't have to just kind of hide behind a whole smoke screen. So I believe that as much as ever. Today's myth extends that idea. It's not just customers that we can measure and really understand the differences and leverage them, but we can do the same thing with our employees too. And on one hand, that seems kind of obvious because they're just people. They're either people buying our stuff or people doing our stuff. But if you think about the way that we tend to talk about our people and manage them, it's just like, oh, we can't put numbers against them. And unfortunately, the way that we've done that in practice, the performance measurement approaches, really bad. And so in some sense, worse than marketing, because in marketing, we just weren't doing it. In the HR world, we're doing it badly. So it's going to take a lot of this, the talk about performance assessment, the techniques that we use, the things that we do or fail to do with it on the back end, and pull out that hammer and smash it to bits, and talk about how we can really measure the effectiveness of our employees in ways that are just rigorous, accountable, fun, and easy. And lend themselves to all kinds of meaningful, needle-moving action.
I love this. We're so focused externally that we forget to focus on the who, not how. Classic Dan Sullivan book, Who, Not How. It's our team that gets things done, and we need to focus on that. I love the fact that we're bringing your analysis, your analytics, and the quant nerd side to bear on really optimizing the team and understanding are there top performers, are there who's who, but not just in a feeling way, because I think sometimes the team is just too much feeling, and we got to measure these things.
There's the feeling part. There's also the politics part.
Ooh, feelings and politics getting
Yeah,
absolutely.
you kind of know that, you might not really feel this way, but you just know it's going to be the right thing to, give that person a certain score. I want to get all of that, all that bias, all that kind of nonsense, and to try to incentivize people to evaluate each other as accurately as possible. That's the key. And that's why you mentioned the name of my newest company, Incompass Labs. Kind of a weird name. What's up with that? Because that stands for Incentive Compatible Peer Assessment System. And that's exactly what we're doing. That's what we're doing. Is we want to make it. Look, let's face it. Honesty is the best policy, and you know what? Honesty should be the best policy. So let's come up with a performance assessment system that rewards you for being honest, as opposed to rewards you for kind of just going with the political flow or something like that.
I remember in the military, we would go to the rifle range, and we would, shoot to qualify for the badge that would show that you were capable. And what was classic with the Marine Corps is that other Marines would be in the pits, putting the targets up and pulling them down and marking the locations. And there was a classic dilemma, which is if we have if your friend is over on the other side and they're shooting, maybe you want to give them a better score so they can qualify. The problem with that is if you do that, then their shots are not going to get better. They might stay the same or get worse, and they might even deploy thinking they know how to shoot a rifle, and they don't. So it's that classic dilemma of, do you hook up these people or do you hold them to that standard? And I love the idea of getting rid of all the politics and the friendships and the other biases. So how do we approach this? Where do we start?
Well, we start where we started, which is in class.
Yeah.
Like what? Why would a marketing professor even be thinking about something like this? Outside of the fact that it is important, and again, there's no doubt that how well our team is doing is a direct function and reflection and driver of how well our customers will be doing. So that's kind of obvious at the surface, but that isn't where it started. It really did start in class. Because all right, Casey, I'm going to quiz
Oh
you
no.
as a professor,
Okay.
as a tenure track, research oriented professor. What part of my job, or not just for me personally, but our job as research oriented professors, do we hate the most and are we worst at?
Well, if you're a research-oriented professor, my guess is the classroom part, the interacting with students part.
Not just that, because in some sense we kind of do like to go into the classroom and show off and be the king of the hill and look at me.
Is it all the paperwork?
It's the grading.
Yeah.
It's the grading. We suck at grading.
Rubrics and
Yeah. So and so here's the problem: as professors, we want to minimize the pain more for us than for our students. You know what? I wish this could be a paper over here, but because that's going to be too much work, well, just make it a group presentation instead. And I don't like that. I still take my education mission and the grading mission very seriously. So a number of years ago, 11 years ago to be exact, came up with a new way of doing grading. And it came up in the most bizarre way. I was having lunch with students. And this is a true story. I just graded some papers and, caring about it, wanting students to learn from the grading experience. I posted the best ones on the website. Okay. Having lunch with students, and one of the students says, "It's great that you post the best papers, but I look at those best ones, I realize I could never write a paper like that. It's actually a bit of a downer." Another student says, "I don't believe you. I don't think you could really tell the difference between a good paper and a bad paper to save your life. You're just sucking up to the professor." Third student says, "Hey, maybe we should make that part of the assignment. Maybe we should just look at a batch of papers and see how well we can sort out good from bad. Ha ha ha, very funny, back to lunch." That was it. But it stayed with me.
wow.
And months and months and months later, I was on a long flight, and I'm dangerous when I have time to think. And I wrote out an algorithm that would do just this, to basically, if this is the basic idea, if you know your stuff, if you're any good, then not only will you write a good paper and people say, that's good work, but you should be able to evaluate others very effectively. There should be, I mean, I'm going to get all technical with you here, a correlation, an alignment between how well you do as a grader and how well you do as a gradee. And so I developed this thing. I brought the idea back. I went to my then PhD student, Dan McCarthy, and so, Dan, can you code this up for me? And he did. Um, I wanted to call it, this is a little inside baseball here. I wanted to call it the Wharton Online Ordinal Peer Assessment System. Wharton Online Ordinal Peer Assessment System.
Whoopus. Whoop-ass?
Whoop-ass, yeah.
Whoop-ass. Whoop-ass.
Yeah. Dan said, that's not a good idea. So we changed it to the Wharton Online Ordinal Peer Evaluation Engine.
I love it. Who doesn't want a good Whopper, right?
Whoopee. Who doesn't want Whoopee, right? So, yeah, so we developed Whoopee about 10 years ago, and we've been using it in class ever since. And it's great. It's great. It's great. It's just so nice because it leads to better grades because you're evaluating each student in two different ways, right? So you get two shots at it. Plus, they lean into it a little bit more. They're going to look at these. If we give them a batch of 5 papers, they're going to have to think about it. And it's not hard. All we're asking them in the grading thing is just to rank them. It's not hard. It's not burdensome.
Well, so they only have to rank. They don't.
That's it.
Okay.
Don't have to grade them. That's the beautiful thing about it. So they don't have to say, they don't have to come up with numbers. Just this one's best, this one's worst, here's the ones in the middle. So it's very easy. But they do have to lean into it. They do have to think about it. And there's a bit of reflection. And they end up learning the material more. They end up being more engaged with the classroom. So we've been using this for years and years and years. And then
Are they anonymous?
completely anonymous on the grading side. Now, everything not changed with the grading, but the school, Wharton, has been incredibly supportive about it. And in fact, the school applied for some like Ed Tech Award over in London in 2019. And I was over there and I met with the CEO of one of the companies I was working with with my other company, the lifetime value stuff. And a guy named Gary Morrison. He's the CEO of a company called Hostelworld. And yes, well, it is a hostile world. That's not what we're talking about. It's a company that's kind of, you think about it as kind of like the Expedia of youth hostels. It's a great company, and he's a great guy. So I'm meeting with him, and he says, "What are you here in London for?" And I explained this whole grading thing, and I see this light bulb go off over his head, and he says, "We need to use that for our employees." And I'm thinking, well, employees grading what? And I gave him a whole bunch of reasons why it doesn't make any sense, and he pushed right back. And like 2 years later, he wore me down, and he said, "You know what? Okay, we'll do it." Long story short, we have now done this thing, this kind of incentive compatible peer assessment thing with Hostelworld. I think we've done it like 5 going on 6 times. It's been game changing for them, and then we commercialized it. We formed a company around it, Incompass Labs. And we've now worked with many companies and thousands of employees around the world. And it's really, really great to do the peer assessment thing for your employees and to think really carefully. Every company has its 5 pillars, its core values. And where do they come from? Well, usually it's like the CEO saw a TED talk and said, "You know what, I kind of like that one." But they tend to be a smokescreen. No one ever like measures anyone on it. It's like, it just sounds good. It feels good. Let's, write things about them on sticky notes and stick them on a wall in a retreat. But we want to measure this stuff. We want to see how good are people at these things and which of these values, behaviors, competencies can we measure? Can we align with people's performance and use for promotions and compensation and, God forbid, firing? And that's what we're doing. Is we're putting numbers where our values are, and it's been super fun. So I'm the professor, but for me, I'm going back to school to learn a whole new field, talent management, and it's been really, really great. It's very stimulating, and it's great to see the impact that it's had.
I've used systems like EOS Gino Wickman's traction, where you grade core values a plus, plus, minus, minus, still a little bit feelings based, but you try to have some observation.
And no incentive compatibility. So you're either a nice person, you say, you know what, everybody's awesome, or you're a mean competitive person, you say everybody sucks. Wouldn't it be great if your own score depended on how accurately you score those other people? So you really have to think hard, but not that hard because it's still a very easy task. It still takes a fraction of the time that a traditional 360 takes. Because the nice thing is every time someone evaluates someone else, we're getting two pieces of data. We don't need to collect that much data to come up with really accurate scores. So and we make it real simple. It's not a puzzle. It's not a challenge. It's just be honest. Be honest. And I have all sorts more things to say about it too, about just not only the algorithm behind it, but because we're outsiders and we're not beholden to the old ways. It's not like we're just taking the traditional way and tweaking it. We're smashing it with that hammer and doing even the interface. We're starting from scratch and doing things that are so sensible. You just wonder why no one's. I'll give you a specific example. Again, you've been through many of these things, Casey, and usually the way it works is you decide who's going to evaluate you. Right? It usually works that way. It's like, usually I'm going to think of the 3 or 4 people who can evaluate me. And that's a whole,
Like me as the owner, me as the leader, or
yeah. So usually each employee
each employee
is going to
decides.
say, who can I get to evaluate me? That's the traditional way it's done. Well, that's silly. That leads to all kinds of game playing and bias
It's
there.
like asking for references. They're just going to tell you the people that, yeah.
Exactly. So instead, you decide who you're going to evaluate. And it could be different people for different values. So it could be that, I'm very comfortable evaluating, Phyllis in the lunchroom on the responsiveness dimension because she knows when she sees me coming down the line, she's going to have that BLT ready. But I can't really assess her on something like, collaborativeness or something like that. So it should be the case that you can evaluate different people on different dimensions. And this thing is so easy that we end up getting more people evaluating and being evaluated. We just get more data. And it's just really fun to then turn it around and say, which employees got evaluated by the most people? Because that by itself is an interesting sign.
Yes, it is.
A lot of companies use ONA analysis, organizational network analysis. Now, who connected with who, and who emails who, and who works on projects. And that's all great. I love that stuff. But in some sense, it only picks up work product. It would never connect me and Phyllis in the lunchroom. So by letting people kind of build their own network, who are you connected to and on which dimensions, we get a much more accurate, a much more comprehensive picture of what's actually going on in the organization, which values are shared broadly, which values tend to be, kept narrowly within a division, which people, are, kind of widely seen and appreciated, and who are the hidden gems? Who are the people who get great scores, but only a few people reach out to them? And why is that the case? Is it the case that they have a really low profile? Or maybe they have a protective boss who knows that they have this hidden gem here and doesn't want anyone else to know about them? So there's a lot of amazing things that we can uncover and then take action on. I'm talking too much.
Wow. Question. Do you need a critical mass number of employees to be able to get coverage over everyone?
It's something that I worried about. And when Dan McCarthy and I first came up with the algorithm, I'd like to say we, but he, Dan, ran a lot of simulations to basically say, how low can we go? Now, it turns out that for my class, I rarely have fewer than 20, 25 people. We found it's quite robust at that level, and have used it at that level many times for the grading part. For the HR part, we've actually gone lower than that. I think we've done it with as few as a company with as few as 16.
Okay.
And in some sense, in a weird way, a company like that, everybody knows everybody.
For sure.
And so
It's easier.
you're gonna kind of cover the space pretty well. Whereas in a big giant company, You might know surprisingly few, and you might have no direct connection to the people over there. So it's actually less about the sheer number and more about the kind of cohesiveness and connectedness of the organization.
Really, the org structure, even it's interesting. It's counterintuitive. You'd think the smaller organization would have the bigger challenges, but to your point, everyone is around everyone at that point. And as the
That's right.
neighborhood gets larger, then you find these little alcoves that maybe only a few people touch. That's like, if somebody had a secretary working just for them, I guess people would interact with them, to your point, in the lunchroom or when they need something or scheduling. Uh, yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's been really, really fun. And so much of the learning has been coming from our clients because it's kind of cool. It's sort of like the lifetime value thing.
Yeah.
I always talk, you pull out the hammer, I pull out the magic wand.
Yes.
So if we could see the value of each and every customer, what would we do differently? And that's the stuff that's my kind of, day job as a marketing professor is to talk about that. But now let's just ask that same question. If we could get an accurate assessment of each employee on multiple different dimensions, what would we do differently?
Right.
And it's been so great for me as a non-expert to learn from our clients. Here's the 50 fun things that we would do with it. I mean, one of them is one that I just mentioned. This is finding the hidden gems, the people who get few evaluations but very good scores.
Yeah.
I never thought about that. But one of our clients is doing that all the time to say, we got to keep an eye on these people in a good way. And so for me, it's just kind of stealing their ideas and pulling them all together, and eventually we'll write a book on this stuff. But it's every day the kind of light bulb is going off, and I was like, oh, I never really thought about doing that. And I'll tell you, it's quite fundamental. Even Hostelworld, our first client, again, they had their core values, and to their credit, again, Gary Morrison, the CEO, he said, these aren't quite the right ones. We actually need to change them a little bit because if we're going to measure this stuff, if we're going to act on it, if we're going to really live to those values, we got to make sure we're choosing the right ones and we're wording them properly. And when we come up with a rubric about how people are going to evaluate each other, once you start to quantify it like this, it actually just makes you think a little bit more carefully. It's not just happy talk. And it's just really great to see the way that they've, in some, I don't want to say overhauled, but have, slightly tweaked and realigned the
Mhm.
values to make sure that they really, really can measure them and live up to them. That's fabulous.
How important is, you hear good data in, good data out? How important is them having figured out the core of that? Like if you just have the worst core values and the setup is terrible, people will still evaluate people based on those, but is the end result, I mean, is that like a vulnerability of your tool and also just the concept?
Well, it's a vulnerability of organizations if you have
For sure.
values out there. So it's very easy for us to look at again. You as an employee are going to evaluate a bunch of people
Yep.
on empathy, responsiveness, collaborative, whatever it might be. In fact, we began this thing by being completely agnostic, almost to an arrogant fault, to say, look, we're not the HR people. You tell us what the values are. We're just going
Right.
to measure them. But then we'd find through the measurement process that with sometimes a bunch of these values would line up. There's just inherently good people and they're good on every dimension. But then there'd be some dimensions that don't align with anything. They're kind of random, and then we're realizing, what? That's one that we just can't measure well. And so,
Interesting.
what company, you should stop using that one because it's not really helpful. You're wasting people's time. So, in a meta way,
Yeah.
by looking at how well we've been able to measure these things for a bunch of different companies, we can now go to them and and sometimes the smaller companies, we have no idea. You tell us what the values are, and we can start to do that. Not because we're HR experts, not because I have any theories about how people in organizations work, but from a pure measurement standpoint,
Yeah.
which ones have worked successfully and actionably with other companies. You ought to try this one too. So in some sense, being a non-expert, being agnostic, but being a data guy has its benefits.
100%. I can see where companies may have duplicative values that are kind of saying the same thing, measuring the same thing. To your point, things that are measuring something totally different, and it may be a word that they don't think it. No, they don't really know what it means. Just poorly place things, and then you're able to go back to them and say, well, these stats all line up. So you're basically measuring the same thing here. So maybe you think of using one of your 3 or 5 pillars differently.
And then added something different. Exactly. So we're seeing this kind of thing just routinely. And one of the great things, again, I'm the customer lifetime value guy.
Yeah.
And I spend my life not only developing these models, but going to companies and saying, you need this. A lot of the time, I'm writing all these books on customer centricity that we've spoken about before.
Yes.
The issue is that for a lot of companies, I hate to say this, it just drives me nuts. I have the solution for something that they don't yet see as a problem. So a lot of companies haven't woken up to see the issue, to need the customer centricity, the lifetime value. So first I have to go in there and kind of sell the basic idea, and then follows the measurement follows. Plus there'll be certain kinds of companies where they don't have good data on their customers. And so it's a tougher sell.
Yeah.
Whereas with the employee thing, every company worries about its employees. It's not, this is something that applies to B2C, but not to B2B or something like that. Everybody is attempting measure. I don't need to motivate it. In this case, I have the solution for what is a major problem, because, any good CEO really cares about their values, especially in the tech sector. They care about the values. They care about data and analytics. But those are usually separate conversations.
Right.
And wouldn't it be great if the data analytics conversation could carry over to the people thing? And yeah, we're doing that. We're kind of bridging that gap, and it applies for every company. And it really is, it actually ends up being more impactful than the lifetime value stuff, which I guess shouldn't be a surprise. But well, to me it is.
Well, and then do you then ... lifetime value of an employee?
There you go, KC Cheshire for the link. That's our ultimate objective. And if you look at some of the blog posts that we've been putting out there, that's our aspiration. ELTV, employee lifetime value. Wouldn't it be great? And we have a bunch of thoughts of how to do that, of how to, and with some jobs, let's say salespeople, it wouldn't be that hard to do that right now. But how would you do it for, like most people in the organization, where you can't directly measure the output? So we haven't done it, and it's still years away. But the basic idea is, can we find ways to attach these kind of qualitative values, competencies, behaviors to outputs for the people where we can measure outputs, and then take some of those learnings and carry them over to the other employee. So we have this kind of master plan in mind. But you know what? But we're scientists, and we don't want to just rush. So I don't mind talking about I love talking about ELTV. Not happening in 2025. Might not be happening in 2026. We're going to do it when the science is right. I got my day job, so I don't need to overpromise and underdeliver or to make things up. So we've been thinking about a lot of things, a lot of extensions. By the way, name of the company is Incompass Labs. It's not, employee assessment something, because there's a lot of other areas that we can use this idea of incentive compatible peer assessment. I've already mentioned grading. It applies to the HR thing. It can apply in a lot of other ways as well. So taking this kind of core algorithm, this core philosophy, and applying it, we have like 5 or 6 different things in mind that are just wildly different from each other. So we're kind of taking our time and kind of capture each hill one by one, and just bring this idea of incentive compatible assessments to the whole world on many different dimensions.
Absolutely. Now I want to crack open the secret vault, that which is your brain and your experience, because you've shared, you're just tip of the iceberg, but you've started seeing patterns. What kind of values or assessment criteria are just not the ones to use, or are looking like they're the least efficient use of time?
Well, I'd rather be positive about it.
Well, negative is fun and it's dramatic. It makes for good clips, but then we'll go positive. Well, either way, wherever you want to start.
So what we find, and it's going to sound so obvious in hindsight, but again, we come into it with kind of just a clean slate. So it turns out you definitely want to have a dimension, maybe 2, that pick up something about productivity. Does this person get the job done? do they deliver on their promises, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, duh. And then you're going to want a dimension or two that's going to pick up something about, are they a culture carrier, a collaboration, just are they nice to work with? So, it really is, you want to make sure you're picking up, kind of, outputs, and you're making sure you're picking up a process. And, again, you want to avoid things that are too redundant, as we said before, but at the same time, it's nice to pick up dimensions that kind of relate to each other, but pick up different aspects of it. So again, one is, do you get the job done? Another is, do you do things in a timely way? They're
Hmm.
related but not overlapping. Um, so yes, so it's picking up, what do you do and how do you do it? And if you haven't, like, two different, values on each of those, that gives you a four right there. Um, so to kind of answer you, the kind of bad question is, if you have dimensions that aren't really at all aligned with either of those things, then that's probably a dimension that's just, it's either one that you just can't properly measure, or even if you can, like, so what? If it's not going to help you on the output side or the process side, then it's, at best, nice to know. So it's so, you could, does this person dress well? I mean, okay, that's one we could probably measure pretty well, but it's not going to really help us. Uh, so so that's why I want to be careful what we say is a bad dimension. But if it's not picking up on, outputs and process, then now, of course, once again, I'm not the HR guy, and there might be some companies, and might be legitimate, that, does the employee dress well? In some settings, that's going to matter. So, far be it from me to tell companies not to use it. But we do see some general patterns emerging across companies, and it's just really nice to see it. Now, so far we've done this. We've done it, I don't know, with about a dozen and a half companies, some of them, quite big. And I mentioned multiple times, in fact, every single company we've done it with has always, every single one has come back for more, 100% retention.
Mm.
Um, but that's still a relatively small sample. Talk to me again after you've done with 1,000, and we're getting there. To be able to do that meta-analysis, to really understand which dimensions, and even start to tie it to which type of company. So if we're a tech firm, which ones make sense? If we're a service firm, which ones make sense?
Right.
Years away, but I'm eager to get there. And for me, it's the science as much as it is the commercial opportunity.
For sure. And the reason I'm going to keep poking at this for a bit, is that I think as a company founder, I experienced this, certainly HR and Mark, the values that you set for a company, no one actually, it's almost like everyone's okay. Like whatever you want to set is good for you. Like, hey, these are what's important to you. Go ahead, make these values. And maybe there's descriptions about it, but no one really zeroes in to tell you, hey, these are really the things you should evaluate people on. And maybe you give it your own creative wording, but at its heart, you've already broken down some for me, the idea of, do they get the work done? And then maybe timely is a facet to that. My company doesn't have this, but I've seen this in other places. Like, do they do it safely? If this is a place where safety could be, risks need to be mitigated, safety might be something, and people can evaluate that. But then on the other side, that the culture carrier, the collaboration side, are there particular aspects you've seen, like trends, on that side, the 1 to 2? What would you put those as?
What do you mean by the 1 to 2?
You mentioned maybe 1 to 2 values you're evaluating on
Right, right.
the cultural side, the personal.
And that's the one I find most fascinating. Because
Yeah.
again, measuring outputs, yeah, that's pretty easy,
Right.
and it's not too hard to find. Does the person get done is going to align pretty well with the stuff they get done. So in that sense, we're almost confirming. I don't want to say the obvious, but the observable.
Yeah.
The cultural side, the soft, squishy stuff that makes a quant guy like me uncomfortable. To really identify who are those cultural ambassadors within the organization. I'll give specific examples. So, work with a company, and they want to identify the cultural ambassadors. Okay, so literally, so first they decided from on the executive team, they kind of had a little huddle up and did it in a very traditional way. Who do we think the cultural ambassadors are? Among the people we know. Okay, great, that's easy. and not, different. Now we're going to do our assessment scheme on the, 5 dimensions, and let's find out which dimensions kind of distinguish those identified cultural ambassadors. How are they different on these dimensions? What's that kind of just overall profile for these folks as opposed to everybody else? And now let's do our assessment with everybody in the organization, all 1,000 people. Let's find the other people lower down in the organization who fit that same profile and say, you know what, these people look like either they are or they're primed to become cultural ambassadors. Now, again, I mean, they're doing a good job, who knows, but they fit that profile of what we deem to be a cultural ambassador. That's really cool to identify these kind of low down people who just seem to, kind of have it in them. And again, to maybe keep an eye on them, maybe put them in a different role, maybe, have that group of people get together and talk to each other. And kind of build this community of cultural ambassadors, even if they're from different parts of the organization. And in a similar way, if I may, if we look at which dimensions you're good and bad at, and you look at which dimensions I'm good and bad at, let's try to find out people in the organization who are the perfect complements to me or you. So the people who are good at the things I'm bad at and bad at the things that I'm good at, and then set up kind of one-to-one coaching. And again, they might be in different areas, but I could teach you a little bit about collaboration. You can teach me a little bit about empathy. And it just creates more connections. It creates more, meaningful conversations around these core values. Bunch of things like that. Pick the people who are the best on a particular dimension and have them do a kind of a lunchtime, webinar for everybody else about, how they think about that dimension. It's just so many ways to go with this. You can tell I'm kind of excited about it.
How do you avoid, because I feel like it works beautiful in theory. How do you avoid just the down and dirty popularity test, right? There could be someone who just gets the work done, but they're an asshole. And so I just hate this guy. What keeps me from just bombing all their stats?
Because of the incentive compatible part. That if you kind of go out there to undermine someone,
Right,
but other people are rating them as pretty well, it's going to make you look like you don't know what you're talking about, and therefore your own score is going to come down. So I'm going to say it again: honesty is the best policy. And when it comes to these assessments, honesty should be the best policy. And so you're going to absolutely avoid any kind of game playing like that because your own score depends on it. Oh, and by the way, by getting people to be honest, here's a big one. We can detect bias. If we find that there are certain people who share certain characteristics who are getting systematically higher or lower scores than everybody else, there's some bias in the system. So for instance, I'm going to go back to our friends at Hostelworld. Gary Morrison said, let's look for bias. Let's see, is it the case that the senior management team is getting higher scores? Now, in this case, it might not be bias. It might be legitimate. They're better.
Yeah.
There's a reason for it.
The leaders, yeah.
So it's not, I don't mean bias in that way, but, systematically different scores. And Gary once said, what would my score be if you kind of changed my title from, CEO to,
Yes.
junior or something or other? What would my scores be then? Let's de-bias my scores. And that's kind of cool. With one company, and I will not name this one, we actually found signs of racial bias. They gave us a lot of the kind of the data from the from the HRIS, the Human Resource Information System, and so very often we can kind of triangulate the scores by job function or geography or again a level in the organization. Easy. We had some data about ethnicity, and we found that there were some systematic biases there. People in certain ethnic groups were getting systematically lower scores. I mean, it's just, but it's good to know that. And of course, it created a real ethical dilemma for us. Do we tell them? They didn't ask us. So to actually, seriously, to be able to detect bias and then to de-bias the scores. Let's take the scores for those groups that are either getting too low and kind of, raise them. Not to say, I'm not saying we're We're necessarily giving people advantages they don't deserve or anything like that. But if we're finding there's problems in the measurement system, then we want to fix that, and
Yeah,
maybe have some problems in the corporate culture to
sure.
address it more fundamentally.
Yeah, and I can see, with the 360, things do get weird for different levels of seniority, and ideally your direct peer team can have the least amount because you're all VPs or you're all in that particular element. Quick question: how does this handle generational changes? Different
Ooh,
generations.
I love that question, and no one's ever asked, at least not to me
All
before.
right.
So first of all, we could easily look for it. Again, if we have some indication of age or generation or other kinds of personality, something or other, if we have that in the HRIS, we could easily look at the scores against it and see. In fact, that would be so cool to do. It's not just a matter of, are the Gen Z people doing better than the Gen Alphas or whatever, but on which dimensions do they differ, most systematically? I bet we find something like that for sure. Because it might be the case that we have to start shifting our cultural values. It's not enough to say, you kids, you need to act by the same rules that grandpa did when he founded the firm. And so, yeah, we should really identify how our cultural capabilities are shifting with this is why I love doing this thing.
Hey,
That's great. That's really great. I'm going to write that one down and steal it. That's my idea.
yeah, please do. Don't forget
Yeah.
to APA cite me, right? How do you cite a podcast? I don't know if you can. I haven't learned that yet. Yeah. So it's something that I've been really thinking about myself as we have different generations, and even at my own team. That first of all, the joke in my mind was something like, Casey tells too many dad jokes, so we're gonna rank him a little bit lower. They don't hit like the YouTube.
And so maybe that's one of the dimensions, your dad jokiness, do you have,
Humor, Casey
that? So
zero.
actually, humor is a very interesting dimension that, again, never come up, at least not in my experience. But you could easily imagine making humor a dimension. One could argue that that's kind of a really nice thing that goes along with, collaboration and empathy and so on. Humor, I love it. Yeah, and so it would be really cool to kind of have people assess each other on their willingness to use humor as well as how effectively they do so, and then seeing how well that ties in with outputs and process and so on.
How do you not just turn this into asking everything, and becoming a personality test as well as a metrics test, and in differentiating between personality traits and effectiveness on the job?
That is a really good question. If you notice, I've been kind of somewhat agnostic when I keep talking about behaviors, competencies, values. So on one hand, it's whatever you want, we'll measure it. But like you said, we've been learning about things that do tie more to getting stuff done, and that's why we haven't really looked at generations. We haven't looked at personality types, and maybe it's a bias on my part. I don't think there's going to be as strong a connection, and if we're all going to ask, whatever, 4 or 5 dimensions, then we want to choose wisely. But there's nothing stopping you from going further.
Well, it makes me think of the television VCR remote. Not that anyone listening to this remembers, speaking of generations, of VCR, but it started with an on and a play button, and then it turned into 30 different buttons, and you'll really just need to start
Yeah.
and stop the video, right? And so I could see this going from asking 4 questions to, I really want to know, 50 things about each of the people on the team.
So let me give you a twist on that,
Yeah.
because you're right, that is a risk. But we tend to. But first, I have to say that I don't think it's come up with a client. I don't think anyone's ever kind of overdone it. 4 or 5. But the thing that we do on top of that is to get the qualitative assessments as well. It's still important to get words, not just numbers on a scale. So we'll also say, while you're evaluating your 6 or 7 colleagues on collaborativeness, it would be great if you could offer some comments and it's up to the company,
Yeah.
all, 2, whatever, the best one, the worst one. So we'll have people put in comments as well, and then this is where the AI comes in. How cool is this? That you know, at the end of it, you could see that I've rated Casey, high on this and low on that.
Hmm.
And now it's time. Here's the comment box. What am I
Yeah.
going to say about Casey? Well, the AI is going to look at the scores that I gave you, and it's going to actually kind of seed some of the qualitative, and kind of coach me along to make sure that the comments that I'm giving you are going to be as rich, as helpful, and as aligned with the
Hmm.
quantitative scores that you got. So we want the qualitative comments to be just really helpful as well. So
Yeah.
that's sometimes where it gets burdensome, both for the implementation of it and even the analysis of it. It's because now you get the scores, now you get the comments, and bringing it all together. But so that's kind of sometimes where we're I don't say going too far, but where we're being mindful and we're saying don't require a comment for everybody. That's too much. Yeah, that's where there's a bit more discretion.
I like the open-ended nature of it. We've had a lot of conversations on this podcast about lead forms where people are filling those out, and oftentimes there'll be a lead source, and it's a drop down menu, and really the best of the best marketers on here have shared, no, don't make that a drop down menu. Yes, I know it gives you clean data, but don't do that. Leave it as an open text box, and people may tell you the much more accurate thing that you didn't put on there because you didn't even realize that that was a source.
I mean, here you
Yeah.
go. Okay, this is so great. So again, it turns out that our chief technical officer is a former student from the University of Pennsylvania, and he's really into the whole natural language processing. So let's look at the words, the qualitative words that are given to the employees who perform pretty well versus the words from the employees who aren't doing as well.
Yeah.
And let's just do some natural language processing to say what are the different things that we say about them. So above and beyond the formal scores, are we and not only words like good, bad, but just the other words that they're saying can be implicit signals of goodness or badness. So let's use the technology to detect that, and let's kind of learn how the qualitative matches up with the quantitative. So that's still kind of leading edge for us for the most part. Most of the action is just on the formal scores that you give. But more and more, we're looking at those qualitatives and trying to draw insight from them that we can't draw from the quantitative.
Right, right. Absolutely. And what's fascinating to me is that if you just draw the slider a little bit longer and larger sample sizes of more companies, then I can see the unlimited number of different conclusions you could draw, and the research projects and the number of students who could write theses based on the data that you've collected, and it almost to the point where you should just open source, not open source, you should just um, make this like almost free, and then people, you just want the data, almost like a Facebook play where I just want your data, you know?
Yeah, we that is a discussion we've been having, and we don't have a formal position on it yet. Certainly, our lead is we want to help do better assessment.
Right.
As data people, I've been thinking a lot about that. Yeah, exactly what you said. Let's kind of, in some sense, give it away, do it at cost, but then develop this giant corpus of data across a lot of companies and have people, and start doing research reports on it and have people subscribe, become, to all these insights. Wouldn't rule that out.
Yeah.
Wouldn't rule that out at all.
Brilliant idea.
It's not part of the roadmap per se, at least not yet. But when we get to, client 1,000, and
Yep.
we look at all that data, and we are doing a very, very good job of kind of collecting it and putting ourselves in a position to do that, whether we do or not. Yeah, we'll look around and say, are there bona fide insights here? And could we commercialize it, and would it dilute or to distract from kind of the assessments themselves? Open to it. Anything's
Yeah.
possible. It's the same kind of thing even on the customer side, where we can start to say, again, let's database companies. Which companies have higher pockets of customer value than others? Let's have a customer value index. So I'm always thinking about stuff like that.
There's endless possibilities, and I literally could talk to you about this for an entire day. So maybe we should plan a 24-hour podcast stream at
I
some
love it.
point to talk about this, and you could bring in people. But have you looked? The time has warped on us. It has literally flown by, and I can't even
Yes.
believe it. So please share, where can people go either to connect with you or Encompass Labs? Where do you want them to reach out?
It's interesting. My usual answer is just Google me, look at my stuff. But that's all the kind of marketing, customer kinds of things.
Right.
So if you want to see what's going on with this HR thing, again, the company's called Incompass Labs, IN Compass, Incentive Compatible Peer Assessment System, encompass-labs.com. And there actually is a lot of good content there. Because we're just, these ideas are coming up all the time. We have just a wonderful team. So we're always jotting things down. We have some really good HR experts on the outside who are sometimes writing about us and sharing their thoughts, and which is great. Yeah. So in Encompass Labs, it's actually not yet becoming that kind of meta place that we just described, but we're working our way there. And really, I'm happy to talk about it if people want to reach out to me. But we have a really tremendous team, including a fellow New Hampshireite like yourself, our CEO, Jessica DeVlieger, who's just one of the most interesting people I've ever met. I met her doing customer work, and now she came on over to be our CEO. Yeah, our team, we love to talk to people about this because of the clean slate, the new world. Tell us your ideas, your concerns, and we're still evolving this thing. So we're not just saying take it or leave it. So it's been really fun.
The possibilities are endless. People should go and subscribe and stay in the loop to the newsletter, whatever kind of contact, because I can see as new things come out, you're going to put them out there. So people should stay in the loop. Absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on here and sharing this passion you have for tracking this other element that is often not tracked to the point. Man, to put someone who really gets data and really wants to use it in its pure sense, it's so exciting. So thank you for coming on here and sharing that.
Okay, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity, and sorry for talking too much. But
No, like I said, I could talk to you all day. For those listening, if you learned something, I freaking know you did, because I literally have 2 pages of notes over here, front and back. And wow, yeah, these are one of those things where we'll have to have you come back on and update us as we learn more about the ideal team members for different companies. Amazing. Dr. Peter Fader, thank you, sir.
thank you so much, Casey. Take care, and thanks for the opportunity.
Absolutely. Guys, what a crazy cool episode of the Hardcore Marketing Show. We will see you all next time.